They found bones under the kitchen floor. Not animal bones, human bones. The town doctor walked inside once and refused to return. The preacher walked into the yard, saw the stones at the edge of the property, each marked with names, and he left the county that night, never to speak of it again. What was discovered on that ridge in 1892 was not a scandal. It was not even sin. It was something deeper, something that should never have existed, because a name was written in ink on a single birth certificate, a name that tied a man not to a father, but to his own mother. The name was Jacob Elbridge, and his bloodline carried a secret so dangerous that officials rewrote county records. They erased the files, but one fragment survived, and it told the truth. He had no father. He was the child of his own mother, and when he came of age, he would make her his bride. America has its hidden families, the kind you never read in newspapers, the kind erased before they could shame the state. Western Appalachia was fertile ground for such shadows. The mountains cut families off from the world, and isolation breeds patterns that outsiders do not see, or they see it and choose silence. But Jacob was not born from poverty. Jacob was born from obsession. Sarah Elbridge. His mother was 31 when she gave birth, unmarried. Pale, secretive. She lived on that ridge alone. She came down from the mountain, rarely her voice, soft and strange, her gaze fixed too long on whoever she spoke to. She bought double rations, one for herself and one for the boy no one had ever seen, yet the boy was real, and he was being raised not as a child, but as something else. Neighbors testified years later. They spoke of nights when voices echoed from the hills, sometimes chanting, sometimes crying, sometimes laughter. Two voices, always the same pitch, male and female overlapping, the sound of someone teaching another to mimic them perfectly. Jacob was her son in the ordinary sense. He was her reflection. He was her partner. He was her creation. He was being shaped for a role the town was not ready to imagine, a role that would one day redefine the meaning of corruption. Not political, not financial, but biological. Spiritual forbidden. By the time Jacob turned 15, he was 6 feet tall, ghostly pale, unseen in town. His mother still appeared, but she now wore a ring handmade carved from the wood of the ridge. The inscription, "To my life from your birth." Not a gift from a mother, a gift from a wife. The census of 1890 listed Jacob Elbridge as head of household age 21. There was no wife, no siblings, no boarders, only him. And one other woman recorded only as S. Elbridge, age 52, relationship unknown, not mother, not wife, just presence. A presence that was both and neither. Around that same year, the land began to change. 4 neighboring families sold their farms all within months. None made sense. Families do not abandon livestock tools and Bibles unless something larger forces their hand. Yet they did. They left without packing. They left as if they were being driven not by fear of poverty, but by something breathing at their door. By something unseen. The Elbridge land grew as others retreated, and Jacob and Sarah began to build. But not a house, not a cabin. What rose from the soil was a labyrinth. 7 structures joined by crooked corridors, mirrors, hung in impossible places. Windows nailed from the inside. It was not a home, it was a womb. The mailman refused to deliver past the gate. He said the trees leaned inward like soldiers, bowing towards a hidden king. He said the wind did not move inside the property. It waited for permission. Locals began calling it the womb, and Jacob was seen more often now. He walked the edge of town in his black coat, barefoot, silent. His skin was bone. His eyes never blinked. Children whispered that he smelled like perfume. Her perfume. By autumn, Sarah vanished. No more trips to town, no more voice floating down the mountain. But Jacob spoke of someone again and again. He wrote of my beloved in letters, in conversations, in a journal found decades later in ashes. His words were chilling. She is before me and within me. Her touch makes me pure. Her name is my name. He signed, not Jacob, but simply Elbridge. By then, he had stopped being a son. He had become a husband, a priest, a shadow of a bloodline folding inward, a living echo of the womb that bore him. The ridge, Hodge, had been claimed. The county could look away. The church could go silent. But inside those walls, something older than law and darker than sin was being written into flesh. A covenant, not between man and God, but between mother and son, between womb and seed, between beginning and end. In 1892, a letter arrived at the home of Dr. Walter Griggs, written in flawless cursive, sealed with wax, pressed by a human tooth. The ink was dark brown, the shade of dried blood. No signature, just an address at the ridge. Griggs had dismissed the town rumors as superstition until that night. Curiosity pulled him into the womb. He wrote notes after what he saw, sparse broken yet enough to chill anyone who reads them. He described upper rooms filled with dolls made of corn husks and animal bones. Each doll wore the same face, Sarah Elbridge. His pen trembled as he wrote about portraits that lined the walls, showing two figures through time. In one, the woman young, the boy an infant. In another, she middle-aged, he a man. In the final painting, they stood together, husband and wife, their mouths sewn shut, their eyes mirrors of each other sewn with the same thread. But what Griggs found below the house ended him. A root cellar widened into a tunnel, pressed earth, black beams scorched with fire. At the end, a crude chapel. In its center, a bed. On it, the skeletal remains of a woman veiled in lace, hands folded around a wilted bouquet. Above her, scrawled in what he believed was blood, were words. The bride returns when the sun is ready. He fled. He never spoke in public, but in private, he confessed a union not blessed by God nor man, a union that mocked creation itself. For Sarah had been dead already for over a year. But Jacob had not buried her. He preserved her, maintained her, kept her body underground while writing of her as both his mother and his wife, both ghost and goddess. The townspeople began whispering that Jacob had crossed a boundary older than Scripture. He had reversed the order of the world, mother to son, son to husband, life to death. The bloodline folded into itself and refused to break. By the late 1890s, Jacob was less a man, more a myth. A pale figure seen walking at dusk circles in the fields, head tilted to the sky. Chanting echoed from the ridge, not in one voice, but two overlapping in unnatural harmony. The townspeople tried to ignore it, but unease had taken root. They whispered he was building not a home but a temple to corruption older than America itself, a blood covenant sealed in silence and repetition. In the summer of 1898, fire swept across the ridge. It should have smoldered. Damp soil does not burn, but the flames moved too fast. By the time neighbors arrived, the womb had collapsed inward. The house was gone, but inside its ashes, 3 bodies were found. The first was Jacob. His arms crossed over his chest, spine, twisted teeth filed into points. Around his neck hung a rope braided from human hair, Sarah's hair. The second body was Sarah herself, still preserved on the underground bed, her hands folded over a Bible, her eyes covered with white stones. One hand clutched a lock of Jacob's hair. The third body is what broke the town. Smaller, twisted, charred, deformed. 6 fingers on each hand. The proportions wrong, like a child wearing the skeleton of an adult. The coroner studied the jaw and froze. It bore Jacob's exact fractures, the same crooked tooth, the same misshapen bone. The odds were impossible. The conclusion was undeniable. Jacob had fathered a child with his mother, and the child had lived long enough to die in that fire. Rumors divided the town. Some said Jacob set the fire himself, to end what should never have existed. Others whispered, the town did it, that they burned the womb to erase their complicity. But something was left behind. Months later, a new name appeared in church records, a Jacobson. Age 7, orphan adopted. He was placed under the care of Reverend Clean, a man of charity whose own wife and child had died years earlier. At first, the boy seemed ordinary, silent, watchful. But strangeness began at once. He refused to sleep indoors. Instead, he built a small shelter of roots and cloth behind the church. When asked why, he said the church walls crushed the voices, and when asked what voices, he whispered, the ones that sing her name. He carved a ring from wood identical to Sarah's gift to Jacob, and wore it always. Clean kept a journal, at first, drawings, scribbles, mutterings. By winter, the entry, ice grew frantic. The boy does not age. His smile belongs to an old man. His voice sometimes splits into 2, one high, one low. He calls me father, but not as a son, as if I am smaller, as if I am beneath him. On a storm night, Clean woke to find the boy standing by his bed, soaked with rain, smiling. In his hand, burned paper, bearing only one clear phrase. The bride returns when the sun is ready. Days after that storm, Reverend Clean's home burned to the ground. His body was found in the cellar, arranged exactly like Sarah Elbridge had been. Hands folded, eyes covered, mouth stitched shut. The boy was gone. Not a footprint, not a witness, only a final message carved into the wall of his outdoor shelter. She came back, not as before, but as fire, and she took me in her arms. The orphan had disappeared, but the pattern remained. He carried the Elbridge blood. He carried the circle. The county tried again to erase the name. They buried the church record in silence. But silence is not burial. It is incubation. Decades passed. The ridge was renamed the Burned Place. Children learned not to ask about it. Elders spoke in half-whispers. The Elbridge name began to fade from memory, but trauma does not fade. It waits underground. And every generation something stirred, something seen from the corner of the eye, a figure pale, a voice doubled, echoes in the dark. This is where you must pause. This is where the story becomes more than history. Because if you are still here, you already carry the knowledge, and once carried it, cannot be dropped. So I ask you to act, not for me, but for yourself. To mark that you are no longer simply a listener, but someone transformed. Write in the comments, the blood runs backward. Write it twice, to lock the circle to prove you have crossed the threshold and cannot go back. The line never broke. That was the whisper repeated through the years. She marries what she births. He births what he marries. The cycle is eternal. The bloodline is a circle, not a tree. Hunters began to avoid the ridge. Birds would not fly over it. Wind refused to enter. Some swore that at night, if you pressed your ear to the soil, you could hear 2 voices humming the same name, one male, one female. Identical pitches, as if the womb itself was still breathing beneath the earth. And then came 1934, a government surveyor name, Louis Penn, assigned to document old titles for a rural electrification project. A man of logic, precision, certainty, was not superstitious. He was methodical, but his obsession with mapping every forgotten line led him to the ridge. He thought he found a well. He uncovered rotten wood, and beneath it, stairs, spiral stone stairs leading down into darkness. Louis Penn descended alone. He carried a flashlight rope and revolver. He believed superstition was weakness. He believed only in measurements and maps. But what he entered was older than maps, older than law, older than America. The stairs spiraled down, carved into stone, untouched by weather, untouched by time. At the bottom he stepped into a chamber, circular. The air, heavy walls covered with mirrors. Every mirror cracked in the center, but facing each other endlessly, reflecting into infinity. The reflections multiplied until he could no longer tell if he was standing alone or surrounded by hundreds of versions of himself. In the center of the chamber stood a small wooden chair, child-sized. Beside it, a ring carved wood, familiar, identical to the Elbridge rings. The name burned into the inside, E. Jacobson. He wrote in his notes that the chair felt wrong, not built for comfort, not built for use, but built for ritual. The mirrors he described as eyes. The cracks he called mouths. The phrase painted in fading red stretched around the walls. The bride returns when the sun is ready. Penn wrote in the margins of his notebook frantic, uneven letters. It knows my name. It watches through the glass. I am not alone. The reflections move when I do not. They mouth words I cannot hear, but I can feel them under my skin. She is here. His flashlight was later found abandoned in the forest miles from the ridge, its batteries still strong. His revolver discovered in a creek fully loaded. His vehicle left on the roadside, his notes recovered in fragments and smudges. Louis Penn was never seen again. But locals say something changed after 1934. They said the ridge grew silent, in a way silence should not be. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of listening, hunters swore. They heard humming beneath their boots, not like echoes, but like something breathing. The town grew superstitious. Families refused to build within miles of the burned place. It became a dead zone of memory and land. The Elbridge story was never written into textbooks, never mentioned in county halls. But men who knew whispered that the surveyor had uncovered proof that the womb never ended, that the house was not destroyed. It only sank deeper and kept growing, and with it, the circle kept turning, waiting for the next to step inside, waiting for the blood to recognize itself. By the 1950s, the ridge was marked only as unused land on state maps, but the silence remained unnatural. No bird sang, no coyote crossed. Farmers who strayed too close found livestock dead in strange patterns, bones arranged into spirals, fields of wheat bent into circles, not by wind, not by man. The county looked away. It always looked away. In 1971, 2 teenagers from Morgantown disappeared. Their car was found at the edge of the ridge. Doors open, headlights on keys, still in the ignition. Inside were notebooks filled with strange poetry, lines repeating one phrase again and again. The blood runs backward. The police dismissed it as runaway nonsense, but their parents swore the handwriting had changed, as if 2 hands were writing in one book. One boy was never found. The other surfaced months later, naked in a cornfield, his eyes clouded. He whispered to the deputy. She took him. She married him. Then he laughed until he bled. Every decade the circle returned, always hidden, always denied. A fire, a missing, a voice in the soil. And every time the phrase was there like scripture. The bride returns when the sun is ready. The question was never who the bride was. It was what she was. The womb itself. The cycle itself. The refusal of death itself. By the 1990s, the land was sold quietly to a corporation no one had heard of. Its filings led nowhere. Its address was empty, its records erased. Some whispered the government took it. Some said the church claimed it. Others believed the bloodline itself had purchased its own grave to keep building in silence. And here is where it claws into, now into you. Because the ridge does not sleep. It waits. It feeds on memory. And memory is what you carry now. Do you understand? You are not watching a story. You are inside it. The moment you heard the words, the blood runs backward. The circle took you in. If you dream tonight of mirrors, if you wake to humming beneath your bed, if you see your reflection mouth words you did not speak, know this. You are already part of the womb. You are already counted because the Elbridge name is gone. The ridge is hidden, but the covenant is alive, and she is still waiting, still choosing, still returning. The bride returns when the sun is ready, and the sun is almost ready.